Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about how China and the Western world have different answers for a few questions on what a democracy is. And so this could give you some idea about how they understand and interpret the purpose of a democracy and how to implement democracies. People tend to think that China doesn't have any form of democracy, but China likes to think of themselves as having a democratic system with Chinese characteristics. So let's just dive right in. We have a quote to start off with: "Democracy is the common pursuit of all humanity. As such, it holds a rightful significance in modern politics. Modern democracy does not adhere to a single standard. It is not a single unique flower. It takes multiple forms, like 100 blooming flowers competing for attention. The West has representative democracies centered on competitive elections, while China has a whole process, people's democracy. These two types of democracies provide different answers to the following 6 questions." So the first question is a question of definitions. What is a democracy? Should we emphasize its outward appearance or its substance? Aristotle once said that when one is trapped in a problem, it is as if one were bound by a rope and unable to move. Okay, so we see here that these Eastern thinkers are taking into account Western philosophers, such as the Greek philosopher Aristotle. Okay, so in fact, a person trapped in narrow ideas can similarly be unable to move as if they had been tied up with a rope. On the question of how to view democracy, what constrains the perception of many people in the world today is the view that representative democracy, centered on competitive elections, is the only form and only standard of modern democracy, when in fact it is but one of democracy's many possible appearances. Okay, so they're making an argument here for needing other interpretations of democracy. Okay. To understand what democracy is, we can use a concept from traditional Chinese philosophy. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Substance, appearance, and function. Okay. I'd be interested to see how they differentiate between substance and function here. I understand functional and appearance space, but I've always considered functional and substance to be synonyms. So this might be something that helps me differentiate between these two terms, and hopefully it helps you differentiate between these two terms as well. Okay, so Confucian intellects and in Buddhist thought, for example, the substance of a car implies that it must be a means of transportation with a propulsional unit, a directional unit, etc. At the same time, it comes in various shapes and sizes. Okay, so that's its appearance, with different brand names and engine sizes. Its function is that it carries people or goods, etc. Okay, so carries goods or people versus car implies that it must be a means of transportation with a propulsion unit. Okay, I can kind of see the difference that they're getting at here. I would like to hear a little bit more because this is an interesting distinction between substance and function. Whatever that word is, I guess I'll try to pronounce it just for the sake of the humor here. Tijingyongyong. That was not close at all. I'm sorry. You can just plug your ears before hearing that, hopefully. Also applies to democracy. In terms of substance of democracy, we have to go back to the original meaning of democracy, which is that people are the masters of their own house. Okay. In other words, power should be in the hands of people and at the same time should serve the people. Okay, so this is interesting because I would definitely say that if people are dissatisfied with your governance, then you're not actually serving the people. Okay. And that's a pretty important point there because in China, people are very satisfied with their form of governance. And so for a democratic system, the substance of the democratic system is people should be happy with the system. Okay, that's a substantial portion of what a democracy is. And people in the West are not happy with their system, while people in the East are happy with their system. And so that's a point in favor of China, that their system is the better model for democracy. The appearance of democracy refers to its various manifestations: democracy by lottery, sortition, democracy by election, democracy by consultation, direct democracy, indirect democracy, and so on. In terms of its function, democracy can be applied in different ways and is implemented by countries in order to improve the way they are governed. Okay? Modern Western style democracies is just one of the appearance that democracy could take on. Okay, so they're making a case for different types of democracy, judging by democracy's historical development, which is mostly the Western style democracy, has departed far from its original meaning. And I would obviously agree with that. If people are dissatisfied with your form of governance, you're not meeting the most basic substance of what a democracy is all about. The Western concept of democracy has degenerated from direct democracy to substantive democracy and finally to procedural democracy. Okay, so they're having people vote, but then the votes don't actually matter because the politicians don't actually implement what they say they were going to implement. And so it's just procedural democracy. That's a really good way of putting it. Meanwhile, since the 1980s, there has been what the recently deceased Taiwanese political scientist Chu Yun-han labeled the problem of democratic deterioration. So apparently he's been talking about this occurring since the 1980s, which is interesting. I would probably say it's about the same time period. When you look at graphs of the separation between productivity and compensation, it typically starts sometime around the 1970s. And so I could see that the 1980s and 1970s are kind of a deteriorating point in the West. To see this narrow, superficial, and inferior form of democracy as a beacon of democracy is like viewing a rattling old car that is in disrepair as the benchmark for the modern car, while regarding all other models and makes as not even real cars. Well, that's an interesting way of putting it, but yeah, it's the truth. Where how can you hold up American democracy when half of the people every single election don't feel like the election was a free and fair election? So the last election, people think that there was cheating and vote rigging in the election. And when Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump, she thought there was cheating and vote rigging and things like that as well. And so you have a ton of people who just don't agree that the elections are free and fair. People are not satisfied on either side with the direction of the country or the quality of the governance system. And so how can you use that as the model for a democratic system? China's whole process, people's democracy, has two qualifiers. The first one is the people, which refers to the substance of democracy. People's democracy appears to be a tautology. In other words, democracy, the root demos, already signifies the people. So why do we add the word people's democracy? Okay, as a qualifier, because demos already includes people. Okay. It's precisely this qualifier that establishes the ontological nature of democracy. It is something which belongs to the people, to the majority, not to the minority. We in China guarantee this in our state system, in our political system, and in the mechanisms we use to run our democracy. So you could see this in how they treat people too, where big fish in China, big business, big bankers, they're held to a higher standard, not lower standard than the rest of the populace. So they actually do things for the people. The second qualifier is whole process. Whole process is defined based on the level of appearance and function. Whole process people's democracy is a kind of complete chain consisting of multiple channels, multiple levels, and multiple settings. Democratic features are implemented throughout this complete chain, from selecting and employing people to decision making to management to supervision. Okay, so that's whole process. We would call that something like 360-degree. Multi-chain refers to the party's mass line representation in the National People's Congress. Democratic decision making in government, democratic management, consultation via the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, and various other channels. Multi-level refers to the central government level, local government level, grassroots democracy, and so on. Okay, that makes sense. Democracy also comes in different forms, elections being just one of these. Consultation, deliberation, and selection of talent are all forms of democracy. That's an interesting take, and I do agree with it, where if they're consulting the people about the decisions being made and the people end up being satisfied with the overall performance of the government in the end, that is democracy. You're having the people's input in some way, shape, or form, not necessarily by voting, but if they're satisfied with the outcome after you've consulted them in the decision making process, it makes complete sense that we would consider this a component or a type of democracy. Multi-setting means applying democracy to different settings. There are major settings such as the national level governance and decision making. There are also smaller scale settings such as community governance, mediation of civil disputes, and rural poverty alleviation. Why does the whole process, people's democracy, seem so much more complex than competitive elections? Okay, so for us in the West, democracy is you have an election, that's it. You just it's a representative democracy. You just let people go off and make the decisions for you. They don't have to consult you along the way. They don't care what you think. Once they've tricked you into voting for them, that's all they really care about. That's the extent of democracy in the West. Okay, so it's much more complex than a competitive election. This is because all the democratic methods, forms, channels have their own limitations. So employing so many forms and methods maximizes our ability to move closer to the people being the masters of their own house. So which is the substance of democracy. That's really interesting. That's a really interesting take. Okay, so this video has gone on for almost 10, 11, 12 minutes now, depending on how we edit it. And that was just answering the first question about what is a democracy. So democracy has substance, function, and appearance. And the West typically focuses on the appearance, and they have one type of democracy as well, which is you vote for people. And we're seeing here that China not only has the people voting for representatives, but they also have other means of putting together a democracy, such as through things like consultation, deliberation, and selection of talent at different levels of the government. So we will leave this video here and we'll come back to this. This article is proving to be very, very interesting. And remember, this article is from Sinification.com. Okay, so thank you. And if you like this video, please upvote it and subscribe to our channel for more content. We're going to be analyzing and providing commentary on all 6 of the questions that they mentioned. And we already had a video talking about what is a democracy and a summary of democracy earlier. So please go back and check out that video as well. So if you have any comments, questions, critiques, or concerns, please put that in the comment box below. I read all of them. I don't necessarily always have time to respond, but I do read them and I do appreciate your comments. And so thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.